Couple with two children ordered only one kid's meal. The waitress knew something was wrong. Waitress Judith got a very worried feeling when a family with two children only orders one kid's meal at the restaurant. She decided to keep an eye on them and noticed that the little girl is getting nothing to eat and is not even talked to by the rest of the family. She shows her a sign asking, "Do you need help?" She quickly gets the confirmation she needed. Judith was ready to take action now that she had finally been able to communicate with the little girl. So when the family stood and grabbed the little girl by the hand, Judith was more than ready to stand in their way with some hard questions. On their way out of the restaurant, Judith and a few other dinner guests stopped the family from leaving and confronted them with what they had found out. The father went red as a cherry and then looked at his daughter. "This is not what it looks like." The father started to frantically explain why he did not buy a meal for his daughter, and when he was finished, Judith could barely believe it. But what reason had the father given? Was something wrong with the little girl? Or was something else going on? Judith had worked in the same restaurant long enough to know that she could trust her gut about customers. When a young family walked in that afternoon, she immediately had a strange feeling. There wasn't anything obviously off, and she didn't have time to study them and figure out what about them was bothering her. It was the Saturday dinner rush, so the restaurant was packed with guests. Judith made sure the family was settled at their table and then hurried over to take orders from the other guests who had already been seated with drinks. The family seemed nice, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something. Judith passed the family multiple times on her way back and forth before returning to take their food order. The only thing she noticed was that they were quieter than other guests, especially since they had two young children at the table. That actually seemed like a good thing. Maybe they would be an easy table, or maybe not. As a career waitress, Judith knew that even well-behaved kids could change moods quickly. She was grateful any time children weren't running around or screaming. She almost felt a little guilty for misjudging the family when they'd first arrived. But Judith's relief quickly changed when the family started wrapping up their order. When the family finished ordering, Judith realized that they'd only ordered 3 meals. Since there were 2 parents and 2 children, that didn't add up. There was no second meal off the kids' menu or even a side dish to go with the entrees. Judith's brain started working on overdrive. What was going on? Judith was worried about the second child. Their entrees were enough to satisfy an adult, but it wasn't like they were huge enough to share. Plus, even if the child happened to be a picky eater, the parents should have ordered at least something small. Judith studied the children to see if there was a sign of anything wrong. There wasn't anything out of the ordinary. The kids appeared to be well-behaved and polite. But after years of seeing different families, Judith had seen parents withhold food from children as a punishment. But there was a big difference between not buying food at a restaurant for a misbehaving child and not giving them food at all. She decided to figure out what was going on. Judith asked a coworker to temporarily take over the table for her. She wanted to be able to check on the family when they didn't think she was watching. Judith knew that she'd have to split her tip money, but it seemed worth it to find out whether or not the children were safe. She just had to wait until their order was ready. Judith tested out different angles and found the best ways to keep an eye on the family without them noticing her. She could stand at the waitress's area in the back or hover at the side of the bar. Both places seemed natural. After a few minutes of observing the family, Judith was able to draw a few conclusions. Everyone at the table was animated and talking except the little girl. The parents and their son talked amongst themselves, but the girl just sat quietly. She didn't even react when the others were laughing or telling a story. Judith didn't notice any signs that the young girl was upset by the situation, but she also knew that some children could get used to toxic families. At one point, the little girl acted like she was going to get up from the table. Maybe she needed to go to the bathroom. Or, if she was in danger, the girl might have been trying to get help. But as soon as she moved, her father latched onto her hand and wouldn't allow her to move. Judith almost intervened, but then she noticed that the family's food was done. Judith retrieved the family's food and brought it over to the table. She set down the full-size entrees in front of the parents and then held up the kids' meal. Judith worked up as much courage as she could and decided that she needed to say something. She couldn't just look the other way. Judith was certain that the family hadn't noticed her watching them, so she pretended to be confused about the missing meal. She asked which child had ordered the meal and took a step closer to the little girl to give her a chance to reach out if she wanted. When the parents answered, Judith wasn't surprised at all. Without giving it a second thought, the father responded that the meal was for his son. The children themselves didn't react at all, though the boy looked pleased that his food was ready. Still acting confused, Judith asked if a second kid's meal was missing and said she'd be happy to check with the kitchen to see if it had been accidentally forgotten. The entire family seemed to freeze when they heard Judith's question. The girl took particular interest in what Judith was asking and stared up at her with a look that the waitress didn't quite understand. The girl's father answered somewhat nervously that his daughter wasn't hungry. Judith wasn't sure what to believe. Judith instantly noticed that the parents were acting differently toward her. Their body language told her that they were done answering questions. Even though she wanted to keep asking, she had other tables to handle and didn't want to get in trouble for bothering customers. But she wasn't ready to give up just yet. More investigation. Time was running out for Judith to figure out what was going on with the little girl. She desperately wanted to help, but there was only so much she could do when the girl wasn't speaking up. But if that child needed help, Judith was determined to get it for her at any cost. But how could do anything with the parents right there? Judith kept studying the family in between running plates to other tables. The parents and the son were all eating, but the little girl didn't touch a single thing. None of them offered to share or give her a bite of their meal. The girl looked so sad that it broke Judith's heart. Someone had to do something. Judith started coming up with different plans in her head while she pretended to ignore the family. There had to be a way to communicate with the little girl without her parents knowing. Judith thought about trying to get the girl away from the table, but that seemed impossible when her father wouldn't let her leave. But then finally, Judith had an idea. Judith was suddenly grateful that she knew the restaurant so well. She'd worked there for many years and had memorized where she could stand to see certain tables. There was one place that she thought she could signal to the girl without the rest of the family seeing her. Judith hurried over to test her theory. When Judith got to the area she had in mind, there was a pillar in the way that blocked her from the sun, and the parents were facing the opposite direction. Judith thought she could send the girl a message from there to ask if she was in danger. However, the plan was more than a little risky. Judith first decided to wave at the girl, but the girl didn't respond to her. She seemed a bit confused about what was going on. She really needed to speak to the girl alone before the family would leave the restaurant. Judith had a gut feeling something was off. Pen and paper. She then grabbed pen and paper and wrote a message down. It read, "Do you need help?" The girl looked Judith's direction and nodded without her father noticing it. Judith wrote down okay to let the girl know she would help her. Now Judith needed to come up with a plan to get to the girl alone. The easiest way would be for Judith to speak to her in the bathroom. This was the only place she could talk to the kid without anyone interfering. Judith had an idea, but this required the help of some of her colleagues. Judith informed her closest colleagues that something was going on with the family. One of them actually agreed that she had noticed it as well. Judith came up with a plan to let her colleague accidentally spill some soda on the father and girl. This had to get them away from the table. First, Judith had to tell her boss, because she doesn't want to get fired for helping a girl. Her boss actually agreed to the plan. They must help the girl, even if there was a good reason for the behavior. They felt like it was their duty to know the whole story. So they set the plan in motion. Judith was very nervous, but she knew they are doing the right thing. Her colleague quickly went up to the table and got the order for drinks. They got the order ready immediately to make sure the plan would succeed. Then it started. The drinks were spilled carefully. The father got mad. The father got really angry with Judith's colleague. Judith and her boss quickly went to the table to help out. The father got up and walked to the toilet. This was Judith's chance. She needed to take it right now. She proposed to escort the child. The mother stared at Judith. The mother was reluctant at first, but her daughter begged to go with Judith. Her mother thought this was a bit odd. However, she agreed. The mother was looking around to see if her husband was returning already, but there was no sign of him. Judith thought this was strange, but it would get even stranger. The mother grabbed Judith by her arm. She pulled Judith closer. Judith was confused. Then the mother whispered, "Take her quickly." Judith couldn't believe her ears.